The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Braxton's shooting range as Master Sergeant Rebecca Becca Martinez adjusted her tactical vest one final time. At 32, she had served her country for 12 years, but today felt different. Today, she was about to face the most elite group of military marksmen in the country, and she was the only woman among them. The invitation had come as a surprise. The annual elite marksman competition wasn't typically open to Army personnel, especially not those from her unit, but her commanding officer, Colonel James Harrison, had specifically requested her participation. "Show them what we're made of, Martinez," he had said with a knowing smile. As Becca walked toward the range, she could hear the low murmur of conversation stop abruptly. 23 of the military's finest shooters turned to look at her. The silence was deafening. These weren't just any soldiers, they were Navy SEALs, Marine Force Recon, Delta Force operators, and Army Rangers, men who had served in the most dangerous corners of the world. Well drawled Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson, a burly Navy SEAL with arms covered in tattoos. "Looks like they're letting the Army send their secretary to play with the big boys." A ripple of laughter spread through the group. Becca kept her expression neutral, but her jaw tightened slightly. She had heard it all before: the jokes, the assumptions, the casual dismissal of her abilities, simply because she was a woman in a man's world. Captain Mike Stevens, a Marine sniper with a thick Boston accent, shook his head dramatically. "I don't know who thought this was a good idea, but someone's about to get embarrassed real bad. Maybe they should have sent her to the cooking competition instead." More laughter. Becca set her gear bag down carefully and began unpacking her rifle, a custom M24 sniper weapon system that she had modified herself over years of careful work. Every component had been selected and adjusted with precision that bordered on obsession. "Hey, sweetheart," called out Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, a Delta Force operator with a cocky grin. "You sure you can even lift that thing? These aren't BB guns we're playing with here." Becca finally spoke, her voice calm and measured. "I appreciate your concern, Sergeant. I'll try not to hold everyone back." Her response only seemed to fuel their amusement. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, another SEAL, nudged his teammate. "She's got spirit, I'll give her that. But spirit doesn't put rounds on target at 1,000 yards. The range officer, Master Chief Patricia Colwyn of the few other women present, stepped forward with a clipboard. "Gentlemen and lady," she added with a respectful nod to Becca, "today's competition consists of 5 stages: long-range precision, rapid engagement, moving targets, adverse conditions, and the final challenge round. Standard military scoring applies." As the competitors took their positions for the first stage, Becca could feel every eye on her. The whispers continued, some loud enough for her to hear clearly. "My grandmother could outshoot her," muttered one. "This is what happens when politics gets involved in military operations," said another. "Hope she doesn't cry when she realizes she's out of her league." Becca closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. She thought about her father, Staff Sergeant Luis Martinez, who had taught her to shoot when she was just 8 years old. He had been killed in Iraq when she was 16, but his lessons lived on in every breath she took, every sight picture she acquired, every trigger pull she made. She thought about her younger brother Miguel, who had looked up to her his entire life, and her mother Rosa, who cleaned office buildings at night to pay for Miguel's college. She thought about every time someone had told her she wasn't strong enough, wasn't tough enough, wasn't good enough simply because she was born female. But most of all, she thought about the moment 3 months ago, when she had saved the lives of 6 soldiers during a training exercise gone wrong. Her precision shooting had neutralized multiple targets while under intense pressure, but somehow that achievement had been overshadowed by politics and paperwork. Today might be her chance to remind everyone what she was truly capable of. First stage was long-range precision eye shots at targets placed at 800, 900, and 1,000 yards. The wind was tricky, gusting from the southwest at about 12 miles per hour. Becca lay prone behind her rifle, adjusting her scope's windage knob with practiced ease. Behind her, the commentary continued. "She's taking too long," observed Thompson, "probably trying to remember which end the bullet comes out of." "Money says she doesn't even hit the target," whispered Stevens. Becca took a deep breath, held it halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The shot broke clean, and she could see through her scope that it had hit the center ring of the 800-yard target. She worked the bolt smoothly and acquired the 900-yard target. The laughter behind her had grown quieter, but the comments continued. "Beginners luck," said Rodriguez dismissively. Her second shot struck home, another center hit, then the third, fourth, and fifth. each one precise and deliberate. When the range officer called ceasefire, Becca had achieved a perfect score on the long-range stage. The silence was now more noticeable. A few of the men exchanged glances, but most shrugged it off. "Not bad for the easy stuff," said Webb. "Wait until we get to the real shooting." As the competitors moved to the second stage rapid engagement at multiple targets, Becca could feel the shift in atmosphere. The casual dismissal was being replaced by something else. Not respect, not yet, but perhaps the first hint of uncertainty. Thompson approached her as she prepared for the next stage. His swagger was intact, but there was something different in his eyes. "Nice shooting back there, Martinez," he said, though his tone remained condescending. "But don't get too comfortable. The real test is coming up." Becca looked up at him, her dark eyes steady and calm. "I'm looking forward to it, sir." The rapid engagement stage required shooters to engage 12 targets at various distances, from 100 to 600 yards within a 2-minute time limit. Accuracy was important, but speed was crucial. This was where the elite operators expected to separate themselves from the pretenders. As Becca took her position, she could hear the whispered bets being placed behind her. She'd choke under time pressure. "No way she keeps up this pace. I've got $5 says she doesn't finish in time." But Becca wasn't listening anymore. She was in her zone, that quiet place where time seemed to slow down and every movement became fluid and natural. Her father had called it the dance, the perfect harmony between shooter, rifle, and target that could only be achieved through thousands of hours of practice and an almost mystical connection to the weapon. When the timer started, Becca moved like water. Target acquisition, sight alignment, trigger press, bolt manipulation, target transition, each action flowed seamlessly into the next. Her rifle spoke 12 times in 93 seconds, and 12 targets fell. This time the silence was absolute. The afternoon sun had grown hotter, and sweat beaded on the foreheads of the competitors as they prepared for the third stage. But something had changed in the atmosphere at Fort Braxton's range. The easy laughter and casual dismissal of the morning had been replaced by a tense, watchful silence. Becca Martinez had achieved perfect scores on the first 2 stages, and the reality was beginning to sink in among the elite marksmen. This wasn't beginner's luck or a fluke. This was raw, undeniable skill that commanded attention. Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson checked his scorecard for the 3rd time, as if the numbers might change. He was currently in 2nd place, 3 points behind the woman he had called a secretary just hours before. His Navy SEAL teammates were looking at him with expressions that ranged from confused to amused. "She's good," admitted Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, though he said it quietly enough that only Thompson could hear. "Real good." Thompson's jaw tightened. "It's just shooting paper. Wait until things get serious." But things were about to get very serious indeed. The 3rd stage was moving targets, clay pigeons launched at unpredictable intervals and angles, simulating the chaos of real combat. This was where experience mattered more than pure marksmanship, where instinct and training under pressure separated the professionals from the paper champions. Master Chief Patricia Cole stepped forward with her bullhorn. "Stage 3, moving targets. Each shooter will engage 20 clay pigeons launched from 5 different positions. You'll have 30 seconds per position, and the launches will be random. This is where we separate the snipers from the shooters." Captain Mike Stevens of the Marines spat into the dirt. "Now we'll see what she's really made of. Moving targets don't wait for you to get comfortable." As the first shooter took his position, Becca used the time to study the range. She noted the wind direction, the angle of the sun, the likely trajectories of the clays. But more importantly, she closed her eyes and listened to the sound of the launchers, the whistle of the clays through the air, the rhythm of the range itself. Her father had taught her this too. "A rifle is just a tool, Mia," he had said during one of their hunting trips in the mountains of New Mexico. "But a shooter who can't read the world around her will never be more than average. You have to feel the shot before you take it." When her turn came, Becca stepped up to the line with her M24. The first launcher released its clay with a sharp snap, sending the orange disc arcing across her field of vision. She mounted the rifle, tracked smoothly, and fired. The clay exploded. In a puff of orange dust, behind her she could hear the murmur of conversation, but the words were different now. "Clean hit. Nice lead on that one. She's reading them well." The clays came faster now, launched from different angles and elevations. Some flew straight, others curved with the wind. A few were launched almost simultaneously, forcing quick target transitions. Becca moved through them methodically, her rifle becoming an extension of her body. On the 15th clay, disaster struck. The target launched high and to the right, directly into the sun's glare. Becca squinted, trying to acquire the target through the blinding light. She fired based on instinct and trajectory calculation, but the clay continued its flight, intact. And mocking, finally breathed Sergeant First Class Tony Rodriguez, knew she couldn't keep it up forever. But Becca didn't let the miss affect her rhythm. The 16th clay launched low and fast, skimming just above the ground. She dropped her aim, led the target, and fired. Hit. The 17th came from the left at a sharp angle. Hit. The 18th was a crossing shot at maximum range. Hit. When the smoke cleared, Becca had hit 19 out of 20 clays a score. That would have been impressive for any of the men on the range. But in her mind, that one miss burned like a brand. Her father had always said that perfection was a journey, not a destination. But today she needed every point dot as the other competitors took their turns. Becca watched and learned. Thompson managed 18 hits, clearly frustrated by his performance. Stevens hit 17, cursing colorfully after each miss. Most of the others fell somewhere between 15 and 17, excellent scores that would normally win competitions. But not today. When the stage was complete, Becca was still in first place, but her lead had narrowed. The fourth stage conditions would test everyone's limits. Master Chief Cole announced the parameters: wind simulation, smoke, limited visibility, and unstable shooting positions. This is as close to combat conditions as we can make it safely. Targets at 600 yards, 5 shots each. Industrial fans were positioned to create swirling, unpredictable wind patterns. Smoke generators filled the range with thick gray clouds that limited visibility to less than 50 feet at times. The shooting positions were on unstable platforms designed to simulate firing from vehicles or compromised positions. As Becca climbed onto her assigned platform, a wobbly contraption that simulated shooting from the back of a moving truck, she noticed something had changed in the way the other competitors looked at her. The mockery was gone, replaced by something closer to professional curiosity. Martinez called out Thompson as he prepared for his own run. "Where'd you learn to shoot like that?" For the first time all day, Becca allowed herself a small smile. "My father, sir, Staff Sergeant Luis Martinez, 3rd Infantry Division." Several of the men nodded with understanding. Military families bred military excellence, and a father's training was something they could all respect. "He taught you well," said Webb, and there was no condescension in his voice anymore. The smoke began to billow across the range, and Becca felt the platform shift beneath her as the mechanical systems engaged. Through her scope, she could barely make out the target through the swirling gray clouds. The wind was gusting unpredictably, and the platform's movement made it nearly impossible to maintain a steady sight picture. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling for the rhythm of the platform, the pattern of the wind, the brief moments when the smoke would clear. This was about more than marksmanship. Now this was about patience, timing, and the ability to find order in chaos. When she opened her eyes, the smoke had parted slightly, revealing a glimpse of the target. She adjusted for the wind, compensated for the platform's movement, and fired. Through the scope, she saw the target marker indicate a hit. 4 more shots, 4 more hits. When the smoke cleared and the platforms stopped moving, Becca had once again achieved a perfect score, under conditions that had challenged every other shooter on the range. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the silence of surprise or shock, it was the silence of respect. These men had seen enough combat, enough real shooting under pressure, to recognize the genuine article when they saw it. Thompson approached her as she climbed down from the platform. His cocky grin was gone, replaced by something more serious. "I owe you an apology, Martinez," he said, extending his hand. "I was out of line this morning. You're the real deal." One by one, the other competitors approached her, not to mock or dismiss, but to ask questions, to learn, to acknowledge what they had witnessed. Stevens wanted to know about her rifle modifications. Rodriguez asked about her breathing technique under stress. Webb inquired about her training regimen, but Becca knew the day wasn't over. There was still one more stage, the final challenge. And according to the whispered conversations she was overhearing, this last stage was something special, something that would test limits she hadn't even imagined. Master Chief Cole gathered the competitors as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "Gentlemen and lady, we've saved the best for last. The final challenge round is a tradition here, something that separates not just the good shooters from the great ones, but the great ones from the legends." She paused, scanning the faces of the assembled marksmen. Chief Petty Officer Thompson, as the ranking SEAL present, "Would you like to explain the Barrett challenge?" Thompson stepped forward, and for the first time all day, his smile was genuine, not mocking, but respectful. The Barrett challenge is simple in concept, brutal in execution. One shot, 1,500 yards, with a Barrett M82A 150 caliber rifle. The target is an 8-inch steel plate. Miss, and you're out. Hit, and you move to the next round, where we add wind, distance, or other complications. He looked directly at Becca. It's the kind of shot that can make or break careers, reputations, and legends. We don't usually let outsiders try it, but today, he shrugged. Today's been full of surprises. As if on cue, another SEAL approached, carrying a case that looked like it could hold a small rocket launcher. Inside, nestled in custom foam, was the Barrett M82A 150 pounds of precision-engineered power, capable of reaching out and touching targets at distances that seemed impossible. The thing is, continued Thompson, the Barrett's not like your precision rifles. It's got more recoil than a mule kick. The trigger's different. The ballistics are completely different. It takes years to master, and most shooters never get comfortable with it. He paused, studying Becca's face for any sign of intimidation or uncertainty. He found none. So, Martinez, what do you say? Want to try your hand at the big leagues? The Barrett M82A1 lay before Becca like a sleeping giant. At nearly 4 feet long and weighing 50 pounds, the rifle was a monument to American engineering and destructive capability. The .50 caliber rounds beside it looked more like small artillery shells than traditional bullets, each one capable of punching through engine blocks or concrete walls. Becca had seen Barrett rifles before but had never fired one. The Army didn't typically issue them to personnel in her unit, and the few times she had requested range time with one for training purposes, she had been told they were unavailable or that she lacked the proper authorization. Now, as she knelt beside the weapon, she understood why the Navy SEALs considered this their ultimate test. The target's at 1,500 yards, explains Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb, pointing to a barely visible steel plate in the distance. With a Barrett, you're dealing with a completely different animal. The muzzle blast alone will knock you around if you're not ready for it. Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson checked his watch. We've got about an hour of good light left. That's enough for everyone to take their shot. He looked around at the gathered marksmen. Same order as before. Martinez, you're up last. As the other competitors took their turns, Becca watched and learned. The Barrett's report was thunderous, a sound that seemed to shake the earth itself. The muzzle blast created a visible shock wave, and even experienced operators were clearly affected by the rifle's massive recoil. The first shooter, a Marine Force recon sniper, missed his target by nearly 2 feet. Wind caught it, he muttered, but Becca could see in his body language that the Barrett had gotten the better of him. The second shooter, an Army Ranger, managed to clip the edge of the steel plate close, but not close enough for a clean hit. He stood up, shaking his head. Different world with that cannon. One by one, the elite marksmen took their shots. Some missed entirely, overwhelmed by the Barrett's power and unique characteristics. Others came close but couldn't quite connect. With the distant target, the wind had picked up as the day progressed, adding another layer of complexity to an already difficult shot. Thompson was the 15th shooter to attempt the challenge. As the ranking SEAL, and the one who had been most vocal about Becca's presence, all eyes were on him. He took his time setting up, adjusting the bipod legs, checking the scope settings, and calculating wind drift. When he fired, the Barrett's boom echoed across the range like thunder. Through spotting scopes, the observers could see that his shot had struck just inches from the center of the steel plate, close enough to ring the metal but not close enough for a clean hit. Damn, he muttered as he stood up. Thought I had it. Captain Mike Stevens of the Marines was next. His shot was well aimed but flew high, passing over the target by a narrow margin. The wind had gusted at the worst possible moment, pushing his carefully calculated shot off course. By the time it was Becca's turn, only 3 shooters had managed clean hits on the distant steel plate. The challenge was proving to be every bit as difficult as advertised, and the pressure was mounting. As the only woman present and the current overall leader in the competition, she knew that all eyes would be on her performance. Your turn, Martinez, Thompson said, stepping aside. No pressure, but you're shooting for more than just yourself now. You're shooting for everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. Becca nodded and approached the Barrett up close. The rifle was even more imposing. The muzzle brake alone was larger than the entire barrel of her M24. She knelt behind the weapon and began her setup process, drawing on everything she had learned from watching the previous shooters. First she adjusted the bipod legs to account. For her smaller stature, the Barrett had been set up for larger shooters, and she needed to modify the position to achieve proper sight alignment. Next, she checked the scope settings, noting that the previous shooter had left the elevation turret adjusted for his shot. "Take your time," said Master Chief Patricia Cole. "No rush on this one." As Becca settled into position behind the Barrett, she could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on her. The range had grown quiet, with even the wind seeming to hold its breath. Through the scope, the steel plate looked impossibly small and distant. She began her mental calculations. At 1,500 yards, the .50 caliber round would drop significantly more than 20 feet if she didn't account for it properly. The wind was gusty and variable, coming primarily from her left but swirling unpredictably. The late afternoon sun was creating heat mirages that would affect her sight picture. But beyond the technical challenges, Becca faced something more fundamental. This was a weapon system she had never fired before, with characteristics that were completely different from anything in her experience. The Barrett's trigger was heavier than her M24's. The recoil would be unlike anything she had ever experienced. The timing of the shot would be different. She closed her eyes and tried to channel her father's voice. "The weapon doesn't make the shooter, Mia. The shooter makes the weapon. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust yourself." When she opened her eyes, Becca had made her decision. She would shoot the Barrett the same way she shot everything else, with patience, precision, and complete confidence in her abilities. She adjusted the scope's elevation, accounting for the bullet drop at 1,500 yards. She watched the wind flags along the range, timing the gusts and looking for a moment when the air would be relatively still. She controlled her breathing, slowing her heart rate and settling into the rhythm that had carried her through thousands of practice sessions. The trigger on the Barrett was indeed heavier than what she was used to, requiring more pressure to break the shot. She applied steady, increasing pressure while maintaining perfect sight alignment on the distant steel plate. The rifle fired with a sound like the world ending. The recoil was massive, driving into her shoulder with tremendous force and lifting the muzzle skyward. For a moment, the shock of the blast left her disoriented, her ears ringing despite her hearing protection. But through her scope, as the rifle settled back into position, she could see the distant steel plate swinging back and forth, the unmistakable sign of a solid hit. The range erupted in cheers and applause. Thompson was the first to reach her, slapping her on the back with genuine enthusiasm. "Outstanding shot," he exclaimed. "That was textbook perfect." The other competitors gathered around, offering congratulations and asking questions about her technique. The transformation was complete from morning skeptics to afternoon admirers. These elite warriors had seen something special, and they weren't shy about acknowledging it. But as the celebration continued, Master Chief Cole approached with a serious expression on her face. "Martinez," she said quietly, "there's something you need to know. This wasn't just a competition today. We've been evaluating you for something bigger." Becca looked at her with curiosity and growing concern. "Ma'am, there's a program classified elite, invitation only. We've been looking for the right person for months. Someone with exceptional marksmanship skills. Someone who can perform under pressure. Someone who ... double quotes." She paused. "Someone who can prove herself." In a room full of skeptics, Thompson overheard and stepped closer. "She's talking about the Phantom program, Martinez. Long-range interdiction, counter-sniper operations. The kind of missions that don't officially exist. The kind of missions," added Stevens, "where being underestimated can be a tactical advantage." Becca felt her heart racing, but this time it wasn't from adrenaline or nerves. This was excitement, pure and simple. The opportunity she had been hoping for her entire career was being offered to her by the very people who had dismissed her that morning. "What would it involve?" she asked. Cole smiled. "First, you'd need to complete the advanced course. 6 months of the most intensive training you've ever experienced. Combat scenarios, advanced ballistics, fieldcraft, survival skills. Not everyone makes it through, and if I do make it through, then you become part of something special, something that makes a difference." As the sun set over Fort Braxton, casting long shadows across the range, Becca Martinez stood surrounded by some of the most elite warriors in the American military. They were no longer looking at her as an outsider or an intruder. They were looking at her as one of their own, but she knew that this was just the beginning. The real test, one that would determine her future, was still to come. 6 months later, the mountains of Colorado looked like something from another planet. Snow-covered peaks stretched endlessly in every direction, and the thin air at 11,000 feet made every breath a conscious effort. Becca Martinez crouched behind a rocky outcrop, her breath forming small clouds in the bitter cold as she studied the valley below through high-powered binoculars. The Phantom program's final exercise was unlike anything she had experienced in her 13 years of military service. For the past week, she had been alone in the wilderness with nothing but her equipment, her training, and her determination to sustain her. The scenario was simple in concept, but brutal in execution. Locate and neutralize a series of high-value targets while evading capture by a hunter team composed of the military's most elite operators. It was, as her instructor had explained with a grim smile, the ultimate game of hide-and-seek, where second place gets you killed. The past 6 months had been a crucible that had pushed Becca beyond every limit she thought she had. The Phantom program didn't just train snipers, it forged weapons of precision and patience, capable of operating alone in hostile territory for weeks at a time. She had learned to shoot in conditions that would have been unimaginable before. During blizzards, in complete darkness, from improvised positions while hanging from cliff faces, she had studied advanced ballistics until she could calculate trajectory and wind drift in her head faster than most people could use a calculator. She had mastered urban camouflage, wilderness survival, and the art of becoming invisible in plain sight. But more than the technical skills, the program had taught her something else. She belonged here. The doubt and insecurity that had plagued her early career had been burned away in the fires of constant challenge and proven achievement. She was no longer the woman who had been mocked at Fort Braxton. She was a weapon of war, honed to perfection. Through her binoculars, she spotted movement in the valley below. A figure in winter camouflage was moving between the trees, trying to stay hidden while searching for signs of her presence. She recognized the movement pattern. It was Thompson, the Navy SEAL who had become something of a mentor during her training. The irony wasn't lost on her. The man who had called her a secretary 8 months ago was now hunting her through the Colorado mountains, and he was good at it. But Becca had advantages he didn't know about. She had spent the last 3 days studying his patterns, learning his habits, understanding how he thought and moved. She shifted her position carefully, mindful of the snow that could betray her location with the slightest sound. Her rifle, a custom-built .338 Lapua Magnum that had been specifically designed for the Phantom program, moved with her like an extension of her body. The weapon was a masterpiece of precision engineering, capable of reaching out to ranges that would have been impossible with conventional equipment. Her target wasn't Thompson, though. He was the hunter, not the prey. Her actual target was positioned in a concealed bunker nearly 2 miles away, a shot that would test every skill she had developed over the past 6 months. As she began to set up for the shot, her mind drifted back to the challenges she had faced during training. The physical demands had been crushing: forced marches with full equipment, hand-to-hand combat training, survival exercises that pushed her to the edge of endurance. But the mental challenges had been even harder. She remembered the night exercises, where she had been required to remain motionless for hours at a time, waiting for the perfect shot while enemy patrols passed within feet of her position. She remembered the urban warfare simulations where she had learned to blend into crowds, to become just another face in the city while carrying out impossible missions. Most of all, she remembered the constant pressure to prove herself. Even after her performance at Fort Braxton, there had been skeptics within the program. Senior officers who questioned whether a woman could handle the physical and emotional demands of solo operations. Instructors who pushed her harder than the male candidates, looking for any sign of weakness or failure. But she had endured, and more than that, she had excelled. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in the program's history. Her fieldcraft evaluations were perfect. Her psychological assessments showed the kind of mental toughness that was essential for long-term solo operations. Now, as she prepared for the shot that would determine whether she graduated from the program, Becca felt a calm confidence that had become her trademark. The target was distant and partially concealed, the wind was tricky, and the pressure was enormous. But she had taken harder shots under worse conditions. She adjusted her scope for the range and altitude, compensating for the thin mountain air that would affect her bullet's trajectory. She studied the wind flags positioned along the valley, calculating the drift that would push her shot off course if she didn't account for it properly. Through her scope, she could see the targeter, steel silhouette positioned to simulate a high-value enemy commander. The shot required threading the needle between 2 rock formations, with only a small window of opportunity available. Miss by even a few inches, and the shot would be blocked by stone. As she settled into her firing position, Becca heard a sound that made her blood run cold. a distinctive crack of a branch breaking under someone's weight. Thompson had found her trail and was closing in on her position. She had perhaps 2 minutes before he would be close enough to spot her location and end the exercise. This was at the moment that would define her future. She could take the safe shot, aiming for the larger target area and accepting a good, but not perfect score, or she could go for perfection, threading the needle and taking the shot that would mark her as truly elite. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, "Perfect practice makes perfect performance. Mia, when the moment comes, trust your training and take the shot." Becca took a deep breath, held it halfway, and squeezed the trigger. The rifle's report echoed across the valley like thunder, and through her scope, she saw the distant steel silhouette snap backward, a perfect center hit at just over 2 miles, but there was no time to celebrate. Thompson's voice came from much closer than she had expected. "Outstanding shot, Martinez. But the exercise isn't over yet." She turned to find him, standing about 50 yards away, his own rifle trained in her direction, but he wasn't pointing it at her, he was pointing it toward the valley, where other figures in winter camouflage were beginning to appear. "Final phase," he explained with a grim smile. "Exfiltration under fire. You've got enemy forces converging on your position from 3 directions. Your extraction point is that ridgeline, about 2 miles north. Think you can make it?" Becca looked at the terrain between her current position and the extraction point. It was rough country, steep slopes, loose rock, and patches of deep snow that could slow her down or reveal her position. The opposing forces would have the advantage of numbers and local knowledge, but as she shouldered her pack and prepared to move, Becca Martinez felt something she had never experienced before: complete confidence in her abilities and her place in the world. She was no longer the woman who had been mocked and dismissed. She was a graduate of the most elite training program in the American military, and she was ready for whatever came next. "See you at the extraction point, sir," she said, and disappeared into the wilderness like a ghost. 2 years after the Phantom program, Becca Martinez had become something of a legend within the special operations community. Her missions were classified beyond top secret, conducted in places that didn't officially exist against enemies whose names would never appear in history books. She had become the ghost that enemies feared and allies respected, the sniper who could appear anywhere, eliminate any target, and vanish without a trace. But today, she found herself back where it all began, Fort Braxton's shooting range, standing before a new group of elite marksmen who had gathered for the annual Elite Marksman competition. The faces were different, but the attitudes were depressingly familiar. "Great," muttered Staff Sergeant Kevin Brooks, a Marine sniper with an attitude that reminded Becca painfully of the old Jake Thompson. "They're sending women to babysit us now." His comment drew snickers from several of the other competitors. Becca stood quietly at the edge of the group, wearing standard military fatigues with no rank insignia or unit patches that would identify her background. To them, she looked like just another soldier trying to play in the big leagues. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, an Army Ranger with graying temples, shook his head dismissively. "This political correctness is getting out of hand. Next thing you know, they'll be lowering the standards just so everyone can participate." The new generation of elite marksmen was no different from the old one, Becca realized. The same arrogance, the same assumptions, the same casual dismissal of anyone who didn't fit their narrow definition of what a warrior should look like. Master Chief Patricia Cole, now retired from active duty but still running the competition as a civilian contractor, forward with her clipboard. She caught Becca's eye and gave her the slightest of nods. "Gentlemen and lady," Cole announced, "today's competition will follow the traditional format, with one addition. We have a special guest who will be demonstrating some advanced techniques." She gestured toward a table that had been set up at the far end of the range. On it sat a Barrett M82A1, along with several other rifles that made the assembled marksman whistle with appreciation. "Our guest will